At exactly 9:17 on a Thursday morning, my oldest brother stood at the front of a packed ballroom in downtown Dallas, holding a crystal champagne glass in one hand and a $620 million government contract in the other. The room erupted in applause. Television cameras flashed, business reporters scribbled notes. Behind him, a giant LED screen displayed 6 words in bold blue letters. Mason Tactical Systems hashed. Awarded Strategic Defense Communications Contract. My brothers had spent years chasing a deal like this. Now they were celebrating as if they'd already conquered the world. Brandon Mason, my older brother and CEO of Mason Tactical Systems, lifted the contract higher for the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a grin, "this is the largest contract in our company's history." More applause. Then his eyes found me. I was standing quietly near the back of the ballroom, wearing a simple navy blazer and my government identification badge clipped to my belt. He smiled. That smile never meant anything good. "Victoria!" Every head turned toward me. "Come up here." I hadn't planned on saying a word that morning, but refusing would have created a scene. So I walked to the stage. Ryan, my younger brother, and the company's chief operating officer handed me a microphone. His grin was even wider than Brandon's. "Everyone," Brandon announced, "I'd like you to meet my little sister." Another round of polite applause echoed through the ballroom. He placed one hand on my shoulder. "You know, when Grandpa started this company in his garage, he always dreamed one of us would work for the federal government." He paused dramatically. "I just don't think he imagined she'd spend her career pushing paperwork." Laughter rolled across the room. Even a few reporters chuckled. Ryan leaned toward the microphone. "Hey, Vic. Tell everyone. What's your official title these days?" I already knew where this was going. Still, I answered honestly. "I work in procurement compliance." Ryan slapped Brandon's arm as if he just heard the funniest joke of his life. "See? I told you." "Paperwork." More laughter. One investor raised his glass. "Well, somebody has to keep the printers running." The room laughed even harder. Brandon wasn't finished. He looked directly into one of the television cameras. "I've always told Victoria." He raised the government contract in the air. "People like us build America." Then he pointed at me. "People like her just stamp the paperwork." The ballroom exploded. Some people laughed, some clapped, a few looked uncomfortable. I simply smiled. Not because the joke was funny, because I'd learned something during 12 years as a U.S. Army logistics officer. When people underestimate you, they usually stop paying attention, and that's when they make their biggest mistakes. I handed Ryan the microphone. "Congratulations," I said quietly. "So, I hope today is everything you've dreamed of." Then I stepped off the stage. As I reached the ballroom doors, I heard Brandon call after me. "Hey, Victoria." I stopped. Without turning around, "When you get back to the Pentagon," he laughed, "tell whoever stamps our paperwork. Thanks for making us rich." The room erupted again. I walked out without saying another word. The Texas heat hit me the moment I stepped outside. I took one slow breath, then another. Most people thought I was upset. I wasn't. Embarrassment fades. Ego fades. What worried me was something Brandon had proudly shown on that stage. The contract. Not because he'd won it, because I'd noticed something almost no one else would, the contract number. Most people would have seen a string of random letters and numbers. I recognized it instantly, because I'd seen that exact format hundreds of times before. I pulled out my phone, opened a secure government directory, typed 6 digits. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. "No," I whispered. "Please don't be this one." I refreshed the page. The result didn't change. A chill ran through me, not because my brothers had won the contract, because of which review cycle it had just entered. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. There was nothing I could do. And even if I could, I wouldn't. Some lessons are too important to interrupt. My phone buzzed. "Sarah Kim?" I answered immediately. "Morning, Sarah." Her voice was calm, professional. "Victoria, have you seen the contractor selection list?" "I have." A brief silence. Then she asked the question that made my stomach tighten. "Did you notice who was assigned to Cycle 7? I closed my eyes. "Yes." And another pause. Then Sarah spoke 4 words that changed everything. "It's already begun." I looked back through the ballroom's glass entrance. Inside, my brothers were posing for photographs, laughing, shaking hands, celebrating the biggest day of their lives. They had no idea that the moment they accepted that contract, a completely separate process had started. One that couldn't be stopped. One that couldn't be influenced. Not even by me, because this wasn't about winning a government contract. It was about keeping one. And somewhere inside the Pentagon, a file bearing the words Mason Tactical Systems had just landed on the desk of a team whose job was to ask one question. Do they actually deserve it? My brothers thought they'd won the biggest contract in company history. They had no idea they had just entered the most dangerous audit of their lives. I didn't go back to the Pentagon that morning. I sat in my car across the street from the hotel, watching my brothers celebrate through the ballroom's glass walls. Champagne, photographs, interviews, handshakes. To everyone inside, it looked like the beginning of an empire. To me, it looked like the first domino. My phone vibrated again. Sarah Kim. There's one more thing, she said. I started the engine. I'm listening. The system selected the audit at 8:03 this morning. I froze. What time did Brandon receive the contract? Sarah checked. 8:12. I looked back at the ballroom. He had spent the last hour bragging about a contract, without realizing the audit had already been triggered 9 minutes before he ever held it in his hands. Fate has a strange sense of timing. 3 days later, I was back at the Pentagon. If you've never been inside a federal procurement office, you probably imagine flashing monitors and classified briefings. The truth is much quieter. Rows of analysts, conference rooms, thousands of contracts, millions of pages. People rarely noticed us until something went wrong. As I walked toward my office, Colonel Marcus Reed caught up with me. You survived the family celebration? I smiled faintly. Barely. I heard they landed the Dallas communications contract. They did. Marcus studied my face. You don't sound happy. I learned a long time ago not to celebrate before the paperwork is finished. He laughed. Wise advice. If only he knew. An hour later, our division held its weekly compliance meeting. 30 people filled the conference room. Projectors lit up the walls. One by one, new contracts appeared on the screen. Then, there it was. Mason Tactical Systems. My heartbeat slowed. Not faster, slower. Experience had taught me something strange. Real danger doesn't make you panic. It makes you focus. The director looked around the room. Any conflicts of interest? I raised my hand immediately. Every head turned. The contractor is owned by my brothers. Silence. The director nodded. Thank you. He made one note on his tablet. You're officially recused. That was it. No questions, no whispers, no accusations. Federal ethics rules were simple. If your family was involved, you stepped away. Always. The file disappeared from my screen. I would never touch it again, not because I didn't care, because the law mattered more than family, and that was exactly how Grandpa had raised us. That evening, my phone rang. Brandon. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Congratulations, I said. He laughed. Still upset? I wasn't upset. Come on, Vic. You've always hated business. I never hated business. I hated shortcuts. His laughter stopped. What does that mean? Nothing. A long silence. Then Ryan's voice joined the speakerphone. We're throwing a celebration this weekend. You should come. I have plans. Brandon chuckled. Government paperwork? I smiled to myself. Something like that. You know, he continued, Dad would have loved to see this. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Our father had died 12 years earlier. He'd spent his entire life believing the company should stand for one thing: trust. Somewhere along the way, my brothers had forgotten that. Brandon cleared his throat. Listen, we're expanding. We'll probably need someone to organize compliance. Ryan laughed. You'd be perfect. I looked out my office window toward the Washington Monument. You already have someone for that. What do you mean? The law. I hung up. Saturday evening. Our family gathered at Brandon's mansion outside Dallas. Luxury cars lined the driveway. A string quartet played in the garden. Reporters wandered between guests. The contract had made local headlines. Everyone wanted a photograph with the Mason brothers. The moment I walked in, Ryan spotted me. There she is, the government's hardest worker. More laughter. He handed me a glass of sparkling water. No champagne? I have work Monday. Brandon overheard us, still taking life too seriously. An investor standing beside him smirked. So, Victoria, what's it like spending your career checking boxes while your brothers build companies? Before I could answer, Grandpa's oldest friend, Harold Whitaker, quietly spoke from the corner of the room. "You boys still remember what your grandfather used to say?" Neither brother answered. The old man looked disappointed. He always said, "Winning the contract is easy." He paused. "Keeping it is the hard part." Brandon forced a smile. "Different times, Harold?" "No." The old man shook his head. "Same rules." An awkward silence settled over the patio. Brandon quickly changed the subject. The party continued. But I couldn't stop thinking about Grandpa's words. Neither could Harold. As I prepared to leave, he walked beside me. He lowered his voice. "Your grandfather worried this day would come." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "He kept copies." "Copies of what?" Thus, Harold glanced back toward the house to make sure no one was listening. Then he whispered, "The records your brothers never knew existed." Before I could ask another question, my phone vibrated. A secure government notification. Compliance review. Cycle 7 status updated. I opened it. Only 4 words appeared on the screen. Field audit authorized. My heart sank, because I knew exactly what happened next. Once a field audit was approved, federal investigators didn't announce they were coming. They simply showed up. Usually, when people least expected them. I looked back at my brother's mansion. Music, laughter, fireworks. Inside, they were celebrating the biggest victory of their careers. They had no idea that somewhere on a flight bound for Dallas, a team of federal auditors was already on its way. Monday morning began with champagne. It ended with silence. At 7:42 a.m., 3 black government SUVs rolled through the front gates of Mason Tactical Systems in Dallas. Employees stopped unloading shipments. Forklifts came to a halt. Security guards exchanged nervous glances. The vehicles parked in front of the headquarters. 6 people stepped out. Dark suits, government credentials, black briefcases, no flashing lights, no dramatic announcements, just quiet professionalism. The lead investigator approached the reception desk. "Good morning. I'm Special Auditor Daniel Foster. We're here to conduct a federal compliance field audit." The receptionist smiled politely. "I'm sorry, do you have an appointment?" Daniel slid a leather credential across the counter. "We don't make appointments." The smile disappeared. 3 minutes later, Brandon stormed into the lobby. He wore an expensive tailored suit and the same confident grin he'd worn at the celebration. "Good morning, gentlemen." He extended his hand. "I wish someone had told me you were coming." Daniel shook it once. "That would have defeated the purpose." Brandon laughed. "I'm sure this won't take long." "We're one of the Defense Department's highest performing contractors." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he handed Brandon a single sheet of paper. It contained 1 sentence. Federal compliance review, full facility access required. Brandon barely glanced at it before handing it to Ryan. "See?" He smirked. "Routine." Ryan nodded confidently. "We've got nothing to hide." Daniel calmly replied, "I hope that's true." Hundreds of miles away, I was walking into the Pentagon. Marcus Reed caught up beside me. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't." "You thinking about your brothers?" "I've learned not to think about things I can't control." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good. Because today's going to be busy." Inside the morning briefing, project files covered every conference room screen. The director addressed the team. Several major audits entered the field phase this morning. Someone asked, "Any high-risk contractors?" The director looked down at his notes. "A few." He didn't mention Mason Tactical Systems. He didn't have to. I already knew. Around noon, my secure phone buzzed. Unknown government number. I answered, "Victoria Mason." A calm voice responded, "This is Daniel Foster. I wanted to inform you as required under the ethics policy that your recusal remains active." "It does. We've had no contact regarding the audit." "You won't." A brief silence followed. Then Daniel surprised me. "Your grandfather would probably be proud." I frowned. "You knew Harold Mason?" "I met him years ago." "He used to tell young contractors something." I smiled before he even said it. "Integrity wins wars." Daniel chuckled softly. He never changed that line. After hanging up, I stared out my office window. Grandpa had been gone for nearly 3 years. Yet somehow, his words kept finding their way back into my life. Meanwhile, the audit was moving faster than anyone expected. Investigators spread through every department: quality control, cybersecurity, accounting, shipping, manufacturing. Nothing was off limits. Employees quietly whispered to one another, "They're checking everything." Have you ever seen this before? I heard they're pulling records from 5 years ago. Ryan wasn't worried. Not yet. He walked into Brandon's office carrying a tablet. They've requested supplier certifications. Brandon barely looked up. Send them. They also want cybersecurity testing records. Send those too. Ryan hesitated. And the overseas sourcing documentation. That caught Brandon's attention. What? They specifically asked about the Taiwan components. For the first time all day, Brandon's smile faded. They're digging deeper than usual. Ryan forced a laugh. They won't find anything. Brandon nodded. Exactly. Still, he no longer sounded convinced. Late that afternoon, one of the investigators entered the executive conference room carrying a sealed evidence envelope. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a small communications circuit board. At first glance, it looked ordinary. One investigator asked, "What's special about it?" Daniel turned the board over. The serial number. Everyone leaned closer. It doesn't match the certification records. Another investigator frowned. Manufacturing error? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he requested another shipment from storage. Then another. Then another. By sunset, 8 different circuit boards were lined across the conference table. Each carried the same problem. The paperwork claimed they had been manufactured in an approved, secure facility. The serial numbers told a different story. One investigator looked at Daniel. Could this be counterfeit? Daniel closed the folder slowly. I don't know yet. But tomorrow, we're going to find out. That same evening, Brandon's phone rang. Private number. He answered immediately. This is Brandon Mason. The caller spoke for less than 30 seconds. When the call ended, he didn't move. Ryan looked up. What happened? Brandon swallowed hard. The auditors. They've asked to interview every department manager. Ryan shrugged. So? Brandon looked toward the warehouse through his office window. Then he quietly asked a question that neither of them considered until that moment. What if someone talks? The room fell silent, because for the first time, they realized the biggest threat wasn't the paperwork. It was the people who had signed it, and somewhere inside the factory, one employee had already made a decision. That would change everything. At 8:11 Tuesday morning, Brandon Mason walked into headquarters wearing the same confidence he'd worn every day for the last 15 years. By 8:14, he realized something was very, very wrong. The executive conference room was already full. Not with investors. Not with clients. With auditors. Every department manager sat quietly around the table. No one was drinking coffee. No one was talking. Special Auditor Daniel Foster stood near the projector. A thick stack of binders rested beside him. Good morning, Mr. Mason. Brandon forced a smile. I assume we're almost finished. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. No, we're just getting started. Ryan entered a few seconds later. The moment he saw everyone's faces, his stomach dropped. What happened? Daniel picked up the first binder. We've completed the preliminary document review. He opened it. During the last 24 hours, we discovered discrepancies involving supplier certifications, quality control records, cybersecurity compliance, and component traceability. Brandon folded his arms. So? Daniel calmly clicked the projector. A spreadsheet filled the screen. Hundreds of serial numbers, dates, inspection reports, shipping manifests. Then one row turned red. Another, then another, until nearly half the screen glowed crimson. One manager quietly whispered, "Oh my God." Ryan leaned forward. Those numbers are wrong. Daniel nodded. They are. Your records claim these communication modules were manufactured in an approved Texas facility. He clicked again. High-resolution photographs appeared. The serial numbers identify a completely different manufacturing source. Silence. Daniel clicked once more. This supplier has never been certified for Department of Defense equipment. Brandon immediately shook his head. Impossible. We've worked with them for years. Daniel looked directly at him. Exactly. Meanwhile, I was attending a contract ethics seminar inside the Pentagon. Ironically, the presenter was discussing one topic, leadership accountability. I almost smiled. Life has a strange sense of humor. Halfway through the presentation, my secure phone vibrated. One message, from Sarah. They're escalating. Nothing more. Nothing less. I locked the screen. There was no satisfaction, only disappointment, because I already knew what came next. Back in Dallas, The auditors weren't finished. Daniel placed another document on the table. This is an internal email. Brandon frowned. So? It was deleted. Ryan looked confused. If it was deleted? How do you have it? Daniel answered without emotion. Federal servers retain procurement communications. He pressed play. The email appeared on the screen. Every executive in the room read it. No one spoke. Finally, Daniel read one sentence aloud. Open quote. Use the overseas inventory. They'll never check the serial numbers. Close quote. The room went completely silent. Ryan's face turned white. That doesn't prove anything. Daniel looked at him. It proved someone new. One by one, department managers were escorted into separate interview rooms. No lawyers, no executives, no interruptions, just investigators. And the truth. The first manager insisted everything had followed company policy. The second blamed accounting. The third blamed purchasing. The fourth never even finished answering the first question. He quietly asked, "If I cooperate." Does that matter? Daniel nodded. It always matters. The manager closed his eyes. Then he whispered, "It wasn't my decision." By noon, word had spread throughout the building. Employees stopped laughing, stopped gossiping, stopped pretending everything was normal. People began quietly carrying boxes to their cars. One accountant emptied her desk before anyone told her to. A warehouse supervisor updated his resume during lunch. Nobody knew how bad things really were, but everyone could feel it. The building itself seemed different, like it already knew. At 2:36 p.m., Brandon's cell phone rang. Private number. He answered immediately. "This is Brandon." The voice on the other end spoke calmly. Brandon's confident expression disappeared. "What do you mean?" "Our credit line has been suspended." Ryan stood up. "What happened?" Brandon covered the phone. "The bank. They've frozen our expansion financing." Ryan laughed nervously. "Temporary. It has to be." Brandon wasn't listening anymore. He was staring out the window. The construction site for their new manufacturing plant had gone quiet. Workers were leaving. Cranes had stopped moving. Deliveries were being turned away. Months of expansion had come to a complete stop. One phone call. That evening, for the first time in almost 4 years, my phone displayed a name I never expected to see. Brandon Mason. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. It stopped. Then rang again. I answered. "Hello." His voice sounded different. Not arrogant. Not confident. Afraid. "Victoria, we need to talk. I'm at work. This is important. So is mine." A long silence followed. Finally, he asked the question I'd been waiting to hear. "Do you know what's happening?" I looked through my office window toward the American flag flying above the Pentagon. Then I answered truthfully, "Yes." "Can you stop it?" Another pause. "I can't. You work there. I work for the law, not for you." His breathing grew heavier. "They're destroying us." I closed my eyes. "No, Brandon. I think someone else started that." He didn't answer just because deep down, he knew exactly who. Before hanging up, he quietly asked one final question, one that made my heart ache more than I expected. What would Grandpa do? I looked at the folded American flag resting inside the glass case on my office bookshelf, the one Grandpa had given me the day I graduated from the Army. Then I answered. He'd tell the truth. I ended the call. The next morning, Special Auditor Daniel Foster received a sealed envelope from the company's oldest records archive. No return address, no note, only one label. Personal files. Harold Green. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten records, supplier notes, inspection logs, and one leather-bound journal. He turned to the first page, read the opening sentence, then immediately reached for his phone, because the man who founded Mason Tactical Systems had documented something. 23 years earlier, that would destroy every defense Brandon and Ryan still had left. The federal hearing lasted less than 2 hours. It took investigators 3 weeks to uncover the truth, and only 20 minutes to prove it. Special Auditor Daniel Foster placed Harold Mason's old leather journal on the table. These records were written over 20 years ago. He opened to a bookmarked page. Harold had documented every approved supplier, every inspection, and one warning. Open quote. If anyone ever sacrifices integrity for profit, this company will destroy itself. Close quote. The room fell silent. Daniel turned another page. Every fake certification, every unauthorized supplier, every altered quality report had been compared against Harold's original records. The evidence was overwhelming. The federal board voted unanimously. Mason Tactical Systems was permanently barred from future Department of Defense contracts. Within days, banks canceled financing. Investors walked away. The company's value collapsed, not because of the audit, but because my brothers had spent years breaking the very rules Grandpa built the company on. A week later, Brandon asked to meet me at Grandpa's grave. He looked older, tired, defeated. "I blamed you," he admitted, "but we did this to ourselves." I looked at Grandpa's headstone. He gave us the same lessons. You chose shortcuts. I chose the rules. Brandon nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." I wasn't angry anymore, just sad. Grandpa always said integrity wins wars. It still does. 6 months later, I helped launch the Harold Mason Veterans Manufacturing Initiative, helping veteran-owned businesses qualify for federal defense contracts, honestly and ethically. Small companies grew, veterans found jobs, families built new futures. One afternoon, I unfolded Grandpa's old American flag. Inside was a handwritten note I had never seen before. Open quote, "Victoria, your brothers may inherit my company, but you inherited the only thing that keeps a company alive, its integrity. Never trade it for success." Close quote. I smiled through tears, because in the end, my brothers lost a business, but Grandpa's legacy survived, and that was the greatest victory of all.